The town under shadow. The chair tipped, crashed against the floorboards, and the ranch hand's laughter rang off the cracked plaster walls. Clara Hayes didn't flinch. She stood behind the counter, one hand steadying the coffee pot, the other resting against the edge of the wood. The man's boots sprawled across her table, spurs clicking when he shifted. "You hear me, widow?" His voice was thick with whiskey. "Pour me another, and don't keep me waiting." Her eyes lifted, gray, hard, and colder than the tin star nailed crooked above the sheriff's office. She moved with unhurried calm, poured the steaming liquid into his cup, then set the pot down with a click that silenced the room. The ranch hand grinned, leaned close, and let his words drag like spurs on stone. "Shame about your man. Cain's boys left you lonesome. Maybe I'll—" The crack of her palm against his cheek broke the sentence. The room jolted. His chair scraped, fists curling, but Clara's stare pinned him where he stood. "You'll finish your drink," she said, voice low as desert thunder, "and you'll leave my house standing." No one in the room laughed now. Dice lay untouched, cards half-played, boots scuffed against floorboards as men shifted. The ranch hand swallowed, rubbed his jaw, and spat into the corner. He sat back down, drained his cup, then shoved away without another word. The door banged shut, leaving only the hiss of lanterns and the beat of Clara's heart. She gathered the cups, steady as stone, though her fingers trembled when no one looked. From outside, the wind carried more than dust. Hooves, far yet heavy, rolled like a storm through the canyon. Men drifted toward the door, listening. One muttered, "Riders." Another, "Not ours." The word passed quick as fire. Vultures. Clara heard it, too. She kept her face still, but her son clung to her skirt, eyes wide. She brushed his hair back, whispered, "Go upstairs." He obeyed without a sound. The street outside filled with shadows. Merchants shuttered windows. Mothers pulled children inside. Even the sheriff crossed the road with a limp and a cough, ducking into the council hall without looking anyone in the eye. That night, dust water gathered. The air inside the hall smelled of sweat and fear. Men argued, voices rising like wolves howling at nothing. "They'll burn us out if we don't pay," shouted one. "We don't have what they want," another snapped. "Then they'll take it in blood." The sheriff coughed into his sleeve, eyes watery, voice broken. "Best we clear out the women and children. Hide what we can't carry." Clara stood against the wall, silent. She'd come because she had to hear their weakness spoken aloud. The men turned on one another, their words sharp but their spines bent. Someone laughed bitterly. "We're a town of cattle, waiting for slaughter." No one disagreed. Clara's eyes burned, but she spoke nothing. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron until the cloth wrinkled. In her chest, grief smoldered into something harder, sharper. The council broke apart in defeat. Boots scuffed past her, voices muttering about fleeing before dawn. The sheriff lingered only long enough to light his pipe, his shoulders bowed, then shuffled into the dark. Clara stepped outside. The street lay empty, but the sky was not. A thin haze of dust smeared the horizon where the canyon opened to the plains. She knew the difference between wind and hooves. What rolled there was no weather. It was a coming storm. Lantern light flickered in the saloon windows. From the boarding house across the way, her boy's face pressed against the glass, pale in the glow. Clara lifted her chin. She would not let him see fear. The church bell gave a hollow clang in the night wind. Somewhere a dog barked, then fell silent. The air smelled of iron and dry earth. She stood alone in the street, the wide brim of her hat casting shadow across her face, the hem of her dress whispering in the dust. Behind her, Dustwater waited in silence, a town hollowed by dread. Ahead, the horizon glowed faint with stirred sand, each gust carrying the promise of hoofbeats closer. The widow did not move. She listened. She remembered. And in that stillness, the tale began. For the horizon carried dust that wasn't wind but riders. And the town prayed for a savior that none believed would come. The gathering storm. The church doors slammed wide, rattling on their hinges. Men stood in clusters beneath the rafters, their voices sharp, their fists pounding wood as if noise could hold back fear. "They'll be here by sunfall," one cried. They'll get us if we stay, said another. Then ride, came the answer, bitter as spit on stone. The sheriff leaned heavy on his cane, pipe smoke curling around his hollow eyes. We can't stand against Kane's riders. Dustwater's not a fort. Boots scraped. A chair toppled. Someone cursed the old lawman under his breath, but no one offered to fight in his place. The door at the back creaked. Clara Hayes stepped inside. Shadows clung to her dress, lantern light catching the pale line of her jaw. The room fell quiet, not out of respect but disbelief. She crossed to the far bench, set her hands against the worn wood, and listened. A rancher spat into the dust. What's she doing here? Widow's got no place in this. Another voice. Let her be. She's lost enough. The men returned to their quarrel. Words cracked like whips, money owed, wagons packed, what to carry, who to abandon. Every voice rose, yet none carried strength. Clara's fingers dug into the bench until her knuckles whitened. Her eyes swept across them. The preacher with his collar undone, the blacksmith with soot still on his hands, boys too young to shave clutching rifles too heavy for their arms. Fear ran through them like water through sand. The sheriff's cane struck the floor. Meeting's done. Do what you must. His shoulders sagged as he shuffled out into the night. One by one, the rest followed. Their boots dragged, their whispers low. When the hall emptied, Clara lingered. She pressed her palm flat against the bench, then turned and stepped back into the street. The night wind met her face, sharp with grit. Hooves thundered faint on the horizon. Closer now, a drumbeat carried on the canyon walls. She crossed the street to her boarding house. The door groaned as she pushed inside. Her boy sat on the stairs, eyes round, hands clutching the rail. Upstairs, she told him. Her voice cut like flint, steady, certain. He obeyed, though his steps dragged. Alone in the quiet, Clara knelt on the floor. She pried at the boards until one lifted free with a splintering crack. From the dark beneath, she drew out a chest, wood scarred, iron latch rusted. Dust clung thick, but her hands knew its weight. She set it on the table, lifted the lid. First came a revolver, worn smooth from her husband's hand. She touched it, then set it aside. Beneath it, cloth wrapped tight, hid another shape. She unrolled it slow. Steel gleamed in the lantern light. The long barrel of a rifle, its stock polished by years of use, its scope clouded but true. Her breath caught. Her reflection looked back from the metal, lined with sorrow, edged with resolve. She closed the chest, pushed the board back into place, and carried the rifle to the window. From there she could see the street, empty, waiting. The saloon lantern swung in the wind. The church bell rope dangled like a noose. A knock rattled her door. She swung it open. The blacksmith stood there, soot streaking his face, a hammer in his belt. Word as you mean to stay, he said. His voice held no disbelief, only weight. Clara met his gaze. This is my home. He nodded once. Then I'll stand. From the shadows, another figure shuffled forward. A boy barely grown, cheeks hollow, a rifle too long for his arms. His jaw trembled, but his eyes held. I'll fight. Clara looked at them both, then back toward the horizon where dust curled under the moon. She saw no army in them, only men and boys, yet something in her chest hardened to iron. The blacksmith spat into the dirt. They'll laugh when they hear it. A widow and a boy. Clara lifted the rifle, checked its chamber, her fingers moving with memory she'd long buried. Let them laugh. The three stood in the doorway, silence heavy as stone. Far off, a coyote cried, its wail swallowed by the rumble of hooves. Lantern light flickered against Clara's face, shadowing her eyes. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the street like a vow. This town will not kneel. The night before sundown, the hammer rang against iron, sparks scattering in the blacksmith's yard. Men hauled timbers across the street, stacking them into a barricade. Nails drove, boards cracked, the sound of hammers too quick, too desperate. Clara moved among them, rifle cradled against her arm. She gave no orders loud, only a tilt of her chin, a firm hand steadying a trembling boy, and the work bent itself to her rhythm. A wagon rolled sideways across the main road, wheels locked in place. Barrels filled with water lined the church steps. Every face shone with sweat, even in the cool dark. Every breath carried the weight of waiting. The sheriff stood at the corner, pipe cold in his hand. He watched, but did not move, his badge catching a dull glint under the lanterns. His lips pressed thin when Clara passed. He said nothing. Inside her boarding house, the boy she called son sat at the table, fingers fumbling with cartridges. One slipped, clattered to the floor. He froze, eyes wide. Clara knelt beside him, guided his hands, pressed the brass back into his palm. "Steady," she whispered. His lip trembled, but he loaded each one. When he finished, Clara rose, crossed the room, and drew the curtains wide. The horizon smoldered faint orange, dust twisting under the moon. Distant firelight glimmered in the canyon's throat. The blacksmith entered, shoulders broad as the doorframe. He set a bundle of nails down, voice rough. "They're closer." Clara nodded. She pulled the rifle onto the table, worked the bolt, sighted down the scope. Her movements were practiced, not learned, but remembered. The blacksmith's eyes narrowed at the ease of it. "You've done this before," he said. She didn't answer. He studied her, but the silence held. Finally, he grunted and left her to it. The boy drifted to sleep against the table, his cheek on his arm. Clara draped a blanket across his shoulders. She lingered, brushing hair from his forehead, before stepping back into the night. The town lay quiet now, the hammering done. Torches flickered along the barricade. A dozen men sat with rifles across their knees, staring into the dark. Some prayed under their breath. Others drank from bottles passed hand to hand. The blacksmith sharpened a blade, each scrape long and slow. The preacher stood by the church door, collar loose, Bible clutched but unread. He watched Clara with eyes hollow as a grave. She walked the line, boots crunching in the dust. Every man lifted his head when she passed. She gave them no speeches, no promises, only the weight of her presence, the steadiness of her steps. It was enough. Above, the stars burned sharp. Coyotes cried on the ridges. The sound of hooves carried clearer now, no longer faint, but rolling like thunder that refused to break. The boy woke near dawn, rubbing his eyes, clutching the rifle too tight. Clara crouched beside him, adjusted his grip, shifted his stance. She showed him how to steady the barrel against the rail. He nodded, jaw set, though his hands trembled still. The first light of morning brushed the desert. Across the plain, the dust rose higher, thick and unbroken, a wall of riders moving in. Torches flared red in the haze. The blacksmith climbed the barricade, squinted into the glare, and spat. Vultures! Every rifle lifted, every breath held. Clara stood in the street, her shadow long, the rifle steady in her hands. The wind pulled her hair loose, swept grit against her face. She did not blink. Behind her, the sheriff leaned against the post, staring at her as though he'd never seen her before. The riders poured from the canyon mouth, their whoops carrying across the plain a storm of black hats and flashing guns. Clara lowered her rifle to her shoulder. Her voice carried, clear and low. "Hold!" The townsfolk froze, barrels aimed but waiting. The vultures thundered closer, the ground shaking under their charge. Clara's eyes never wavered. Her finger tightened, steady as stone. The showdown at Dustwater. Gunfire split the morning. Rifles cracked from the barricade, smoke rising in jagged bursts. Horses screamed, riders toppled, the charge shattering against the wall of lead. The vultures wheeled, circling, shouting curses, bullets sparking off wagon boards. Dustwater's defenders ducked low, reloaded with shaking hands. The blacksmith bellowed, swinging his hammer when a rider lunged too close, iron crunching bone. Clara's rifle spoke clean, one shot, then another. Each fell where her eye had marked. Men gasped between volleys, glancing at her as though she carried something unearthly in her hands. The boy fired wild, the barrel jerking high. Clara pressed his shoulder down, steadied him, and together they aimed true. His shot rang out, a rider tumbling into the dust. His breath hitched, but he loaded again. The vultures pressed hard. Their torches sailed, smashing through windows. Flame licked the edges of Dustwater. Smoke curled black against the brightening sky. Through the haze rode Silas Kane. Black hat low, coat whipping, his grin white and sharp as a blade. His voice boomed above the din. "Bring me the widow." Bullets cracked around him, yet none touched. His riders fanned wide, pushing the defenders back step by step. The sheriff staggered into cover, eyes wide, hands empty. Clara stepped into the street. Dust swirled around her boots. Her rifle dropped from her shoulder, empty now. She drew the revolver from her husband's holster, the weight balanced and known. Silas reined in at the center, his horse pawing, his gaze locking on hers. He laughed, deep and cruel. The weeping widow stands alone. The town hushed. Even a gunfire slowed, men watching, breath caught. Clara's face did not move. Her hand hung steady at her side. Silas spat into the dust. His fingers brushed the butt of his pistol. "Then let's end it proper." Silence fell, heavy, broken only by the creak of saddle leather, the restless snort of horses, the crackle of fire eating at the saloon. The draw came swift. Kane's gun flashed, smoke bursting. Clara's arm blurred. One shot, sharp as thunder. Silas jerked back, eyes wide, his pistol falling, his chest torn red. He toppled from the saddle, dust billowing where he struck. The vultures froze. For a breath, no one moved. Then fear broke them. Riders turned, spurred hard, fled into the desert with yells torn ragged from their throats. The street filled with echoes, then silence. Clara stood unmoving, revolver still in her grip. Smoke curled from its barrel. The boy ran to her side, clutching her skirt, his face pressed against her leg. The blacksmith limped forward, blood streaking his arm, eyes blazing with awe. Around them, men rose from cover, torn and bruised, yet alive. The sheriff crept from the doorway, his badge dull in the ash. His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at Clara as though seeing judgment itself. Clara holstered the revolver. She turned, lifted her son into her arms, and walked back toward the boarding house. Her steps were slow, steady, her head high. Behind her, Dustwater stood scarred but breathing. Smoke thinned. The flames were beaten back. Bodies lay still in the road, but the storm had passed. Voices whispered, carrying on the wind. The widow, Clara Hayes. The boy's head rested against her shoulder. She did not look back, and in that moment, the tale was written.